What's something you could whistle-blow about a company you no longer work for? Story 1. Nursing homes are always understaffed and overworked. The worst one I ever saw was 3 carers to 72 residents. That's 3 people who are responsible for feeding, toileting, and showering 72 people every day. Mistakes and abuse are incredibly common due to the sheer burnout that is rampant. Imagine being told after a 16-hour shift that you aren't allowed to leave because of abandonment laws for another 16 hours, because someone didn't show up for their shift, and doing so while making barely above minimum wage. My first job out of high school was as a CNA at a nursing home, and it was awful. Not only were they extremely overwhelmed by everyone hitting their call buttons, but literally didn't have the time to spend with the residents, so they didn't feel so alone. Because of that experience, I had zero issues driving 2 hours one way 3 to 4 times a week to help my mom shower and get ready for bed when she was in a rehab facility for a few months after being sick. My mom worked in a county nursing home from the ages of 18 to 63, and I want to say this. There are people there who care very much. My mom still calls them her old people, and she would screw up anyone's day who wasn't doing their job correctly. My friends would have a great uncle or aunt come through and request that they be on her floor. She was mean to anyone who did not take their job seriously. It's tough. She missed lots of Christmases and other holidays, sometimes volunteering for 16 hours, so she would get that time and a half pay. But overtime was mandatory most of the time anyway. She made freaking pennies and would get quarter raises like the bag boy at the supermarket. And this person is entrusted with the daily care of your loved ones. She has been retired for 2 years now, but still works 1 day a week for more fun money. And of course, as a contractor, they now pay her double 40 for dollars an hour. I think part of the reason she does this is because it probably feels good to finally be paid what she's worth. She did get a good pension. That's about the best thing I can say about the compensation. But we struggled for years. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I used to work in the marketing team for a large recruitment company. About 99% of the jobs posted on their websites and shared on other websites are fake. The marketing and SEO department was tasked with creating super optimized job listings that outperformed real job listings. To apply to these job listings, you would have to register for an account. This would inflate our candidate database, and we would have loads of CVs. The sales team would then take this information and contact companies to get them to pay to put their open vacancies on our websites. Because we had one of the largest candidate databases, I remember getting so annoyed by this practice that I started reporting these vacancies as fake, even on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn rejected my report, saying it was legitimate. It wasn't, and I know this because I created that fake vacancy. What makes this even more alarming is that so many recruitment companies do this. If you want to apply for a job, you're better off going to that company's website instead and not using a third party. I left that place and swore I would never work in recruitment again. Story 3. For years, we processed thousands of components incorrectly, which substantially increased the probability of sudden and catastrophic failure. Well, the component is the main attachment point for various missiles, bombs for the US military. I discovered this shortly after working there. Notified the operations manager, who ignored it. Notified the president, who kind of acknowledged it but refused to address it or notify the customer. Finally notified the ownership, who promptly had me replaced. Story 4. I worked for a candy company that makes chocolate-coated pretzels and turtles for over 5 years. By the time I left, I wouldn't eat the candy even when they were giving it away. I saw them let tainted products leave the factory and cover it up because reworking it would be too expensive, faking food safety compliance and safety checks. Years after I left, the entire team running operations got replaced at once, so maybe it's better now, but damn, it made me paranoid about packaged food in general, and a little horrified at how much blind faith we put in the people that make our food. Story 5. My family owned veterinary hospitals. Now, I know the price has gotten nuts, but this is about something very different. Most vets truly care, and I have seen some do anything, literally anything, to help your animal. I remember wanting to leave after closing, so tired, And my dad, the vet, telling me he wasn't leaving yet. He wanted to sit with this one dog all night. I think vets and animal care workers are very special people. They went to work because they love animals, and on a day-to-day basis, they mostly see animals who are sick and are in pain when they are obviously not behaving sweetly. And the animal workers love them and care for them and treat them with so much patience and respect. Love those people. I, too, work in an emergency and specialty veterinary clinic, and I've worked 18 hours straight before with no lunch. I regularly stay 1–3 hours late. I cry over poor patient outcomes. I have paid for pain meds for a patient whose owner couldn't afford them. I've bought supplies to make patients more comfortable in the hospital. I'm not a veterinarian, but I am still hands-on with patients every single day. Most of the doctors I work with beat themselves up over the cases that turn out poorly. Many only want to do the right thing. We are tired. But I'd say 85% of the people I've met in the field do it, because they just really care. I pay out the nose for our vet, but damn do they go above and beyond. They stayed an hour past closing to try to help our sweet kitty, but he still passed. Then they waited with us after they wrapped him up so we could give him our last hugs and cuddles. I still have the sympathy cards they wrote us. Their sympathy cards were so sweet. I brought them to the doctor I worked for and told him to step up his game when one of his human patients passed. He did. Thank you to all those vets. Story 6. It's a pretty small place, but Seattle Sutton's Healthy Eating actually was super serious about food safety and cleanliness, and never refroze products. Ingredients arrived refrigerated, and surplus would be frozen until the next meal it was needed for. If it got thawed out and still not used for the next cycle, it was thrown away, donated to local farmers. They had zero issue with pulling food off the line and even trashing entire batches if something was off. She tried franchising once, and none of the new locations could maintain her personal quality and safety standard, so she shut it down after about 18 months, even though she was making good money off it. Seattle herself was also super nice, and all her grandkids worked summers there through high school and college and came in and worked their butts off instead of being the arrogant jerks so many Nepo hires are. It was a great place to work. They always made a couple of dozen extra meals each week to cover shipping issues. They also used to leave the excess meals in the break room fridge for employees to eat. They used to let us take them home, but I guess someone started selling them or something crazy, so we were no longer allowed to take them out of the building. We could also take as much of the bulk leftover food as we wanted when we'd clean out the commercial food service fridge twice a week. And some of it was really good. Saved a small fortune on groceries, as did a lot of other employees. Fed a lot of cows and chickens in the area too. That's actually where I learned chickens are carnivores and love cooked chicken meat. We all knew my time there was temporary. I was working as a dock worker after the dot-com crash while I was waiting for IT work to stabilize so I could get back into the field. I also helped out with some tech support for them, and they always insisted on paying me at a much higher, more than double hourly rate when I did, because they didn't want to make me feel like I was being taken advantage of. Honestly, if they could have turned it into a full-time position, I would probably still be working there, but once I got an offer back into it, I had to take it, and they wished me nothing but the best, even without a 2-week notice. Story 7. Bed Bath & Beyond. Utter abuse of employees and harassment from the top down. Always got swept under the rug. If the girl guy got an attorney, they'd move the manager-supervisor to a different location temporarily. I say temporarily because they eventually fire or get the employee to quit soon after. They cut hours and said there was no budget for it, even though that was the only employee affected. I'm happy they're out of business. I remember there was a time when only managers, not supervisors, were allowed to open the door after hours to let us out. We were forced to stay on the clock and clean up and whatnot. That all changed when a girl had a severe panic attack, apparently, which induced a cardiac episode. We kept screaming for the manager to no avail. 911 was called, and we were told we were locked in with a medical emergency. They showed up before the door was open, and you could clearly see the employee in distress. They finally opened the door when the police were after the paramedics. The manager got read the riot act by the cops, and a detailed report was made. Paramedics said they believed she was having a heart attack and was taken away with lights and sirens. BBB got in so much trouble. I am happy to say the employee was fine after being treated. She sued them and won her case, or so I heard. Also, the other employees who had suits for false imprisonment won their cases too. Absolutely horrible company to work for. Story 8. Back about 30 years ago, I worked in the IT department for a famous brand-name aerospace firm, specializing in the construction and testing of satellites. My main responsibilities were maintaining some very old computer systems and some ground equipment, but sometimes I would have to put on a bunny suit and fix something at engineering workstations in the high bays. One day, a strange wooden box about the size of a large shoebox was shipped to my desk by the internal mail people. I sometimes get shipments of things like memory modules or hard disks, but this box has paper stickers on it, clearly labeled flight hardware, something that should never have been shipped to me. Out of curiosity, I opened it and found in the box a device called a flight sequencer. Basically, one of the key devices that controls a spacecraft in flight. What was stranger was that the spacecraft that this sequencer belonged to was a high-profile deep space probe for a Mars mission. One of the first missions to Mars in a long time. More confusing was that the Mars craft had been launched about 3 months earlier. So I found myself holding the flight hardware sequencer for a space probe that was already several million miles away, and there would be no chance to install it now. Of course, there was nearly a 100% chance a spare had been used for the launch, but there was a certain oh crap moment when I realized what it was. Of course, a few months later, that space probe was lost when it tried to enter Mars orbit. I'm sure that is a completely unrelated chance, right? Story 9. A lot of the stuff you donate to Goodwill goes straight into the garbage. No, the clothes aren't washed before going to the sales floor, and most of the items are not cleaned. Please be careful and disinfect them if you decide to purchase them. Yes, they are raising prices to give more to the higher-ups, while not giving anything to the people actually doing all of the work. Goodwill pays disabled employees significantly less than minimum wage. Most of the nice stuff that you donate is going to e-commerce to be sold at an inflated auction price, and not to a local person who might want it. No, the sales donation associate can't give you a receipt with a cash value for all of the junk that you just threw in the bin. Stop asking, the receipt just shows a rough estimate of what you donated. It's up to you to determine the value of your donation, if you're that much of a tax rat. No, you can't sell anything to Goodwill. That's not what the word donation means. Yes, this is all somehow legal. Story 10. I worked for a very expensive hotel in an even more expensive area. I watched many people cheat on their spouses and spend copious amounts of money on stupid things. Yes, I saw you vomit on the steps and walk away. Yes, I know you just banged in our public restroom. Staff 100% do steal lost items, and others are counting down the 60 days so they can take your forgotten items home legally. No, I can't watch your kids while you go out wine tasting. I'm well aware of the cess worker you snuck out with. She's a regular in the area and we're on a first-name basis. And yes, I do know where you can buy illegal drugs, but I'm not telling. You are being overcharged and upsold on everything. We were trained to do it while lying to your face about discounts and deals. Also, all hotels hate third parties. Most of your upcharges are actually from them. We could have given you a better discount if you had asked. They make us hide the real price you pay when you check in. With lots of restrictions. We do match prices, but not in the busy season. The third party we hate the most is Groupon, because they genuinely slashed our prices by 75% or more. And the people who tended to use them always trashed our rooms and stole things like lamps and TVs. Not that our owners or managers care. And yes, the staff are extremely underpaid for the jobs they do when the company is more than capable of paying them more. Story 11. The owner of a high-end restaurant I worked for would drive all around town on Fridays looking for the nearly expired clearance-priced, formerly finer steaks and sell them at outrageous prices to wannabe high rollers who obviously couldn't tell they were paying for ambiance and not quality. The owners were also swapsters. He was late 60s, wife early 40s. Their bar section was a popular swapster's meet, and the husband enjoyed being cucked. They often recruited from the staff and tried to get me to do it. Their adult daughter was also in on this. They eventually ran out of credit with the other vendors and landlord and fled the state, apparently having a habit of doing this. A pet daycare I worked at started out really good, but the owners got greedy and started jamming it beyond capacity with daycare and boarding. People would think their dogs were staying in luxurious kennels but were stuck in crates. They wouldn't pay fair wages and soon had nothing but kids who did try but had no experience managing playgroups of 80-plus dogs, and no one should run a playgroup of 80 dogs at once. Dogs with behavior issues would spend all day in a kennel with a few potty breaks, but their parents would get told, "Oh, they're great, they had so much fun," which is not only wrong but dangerous. We had a couple that were highly dog reactive, and I hated that the owners were being assured their dog loved other dogs. A lot of the staff tried to give the dogs the best they could, but the owners were as awful to the staff as they were to the dogs. Every one of us who left tried to spread the word about the place, but what they were doing is just crappy business, not illegal. Eventually they did have a really bad dog fight, and their reputation took a public hit. Finally, the owners' mistreatment of staff caught up to them, and they got hammered by the state, had to pay a huge settlement, and sold. Story 12. You'll get fired, or as they call it, discontinuing employment, if you get hurt on the job. I was out on workers' comp, and they put me down for family medical leave. When I couldn't return to work within the 16 weeks of family leave, they fired me, but told me I could reapply for my job I was doing while on light duty. When I reapplied, I was told that I didn't qualify for the job I was applying for, all this after working there for 5 years. My brother-in-law broke his back after falling off a train car at work. He was out for a year, but they were required to give him his job back by state law. However, they weren't required to give him the hours. When he was finally able to go back to work, they kept cutting his hours until he was scheduled for maybe 5 hours a week. He had no choice but to quit. Story 13. You can shoplift fairly openly from Dollar General or Target. We don't appreciate you doing it. It honestly feels like an attack on our intelligence when you do, but we don't have enough camera/employees to catch everybody. All official policies say to just let it happen, and none of our products are expensive enough to be worth pursuing the matter in court. However, as a former employee, I strongly ask any shoplifters to take all packaging and damaged products with them. One of the most irritating parts of my day was processing damages and having to collect empty packages placed back on the shelves. And on multiple occasions, I had to clean poured glue and glitter from the shelves. Don't be that guy. And don't open a can of soda in the store, whether you're paying for it or not. But if you want to quietly pocket some overpriced beef jerky out of sight, none of us are paid enough to care. Story 14. Goodwill is a company masquerading as a charity. They focus on hiring people who otherwise would find it hard to get a job, which is good, but they manipulate that and mistreat employees, pay lower wages, etc., because they know they're desperate to keep the job. Goodwill, at least the area stores where I worked, wouldn't give homeless people anything for free. They were supposed to fill out paperwork, and it took weeks to get approved. I'd have people coming in during freezing weather, begging for gloves, and I was supposed to have them fill out paperwork? Screw that. I'd give them whatever they needed. It was free for them, and if the people who donated knew that a greedy corporation was denying people in need, they'd probably be upset. Goodwill owed me months of back pay because the store manager abandoned everyone, and I took over the store for several months and kept getting told that I'd get retroactive payments. Then one day I came into work, and 2 police officers were there to walk me out. Never told me anything other than my employment was no longer needed, and I was trespassed from the store. Story 15. Walmart is one of the most predatory, disgusting organizations on the planet. The disconnect between its home office executives and the frontline employees is absolutely absurd. They continue to thrive largely due to sheer dumb luck and by pressuring good people into terrible situations. About 33% of their workers rely on federal and state benefits, meaning that the money you think you're saving by shopping there is actually coming out of your taxes to subsidize those workers' livelihoods. On top of that, they regularly pressure and bully their staff into submission. Their policies are absurd and completely inflexible. The turnover is intentional. Their attitude is essentially the right people will stay even if it takes thousands. I was an assistant store manager for them, And the biggest headache by far was the people, and it was entirely a self-inflicted, large-scale problem. When I worked as a front-end manager overseeing cash registers, the service desk, greeters, and the cash office, it was nearly impossible to get anything done. For example, we once received a memo from corporate stating that we needed people greeters at both entrances from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week. That's 224 hours of staffing daily. The issue? Who the heck wants to stand around for $8 an hour? As you've probably seen, many of the greeters were elderly or disabled. But do you think they worked 40 hours a week? Absolutely not. They could only work about 4.5 hours a day before their Social Security benefits would be reduced. And understandably, they refused to stay even a minute over their limit because going over could jeopardize their benefits for years. Most weren't physically capable of working longer shifts anyway. But did corporate care? Of course not. They just expected you to somehow find 40 elderly people willing to work some until 11 p.m. on a Sunday. It was hard. Nearly impossible. You also couldn't schedule people outside their regular shifts. So if someone called in sick, guess who had to cover the door? Yep, me. Even if I was at home on my day off, it was still my business, and I was expected to show up and run it. I had a cashier who'd been with the company for 25 years. She started when the wage was $5.80 an hour. After all that time, she was always just a nickel or a dime above the threshold for a cost of living raise. After 25 years, she was making about $12 an hour with no benefits. Meanwhile, we were hiring brand new associates off the street at a higher wage. Every department had its rock stars and its slackers. The rock stars got punished with more work, especially when there were call-outs. Other assistant managers knew these hard workers would step up to cover for their departments. Unfortunately, those great employees were rare and heavily exploited. The truly smart ones turned down promotions. The foolish ones, myself included, let this company talk us into dropping out of college to climb their so-called career ladder. Someone once asked me why I had risen so high in the company at such a young age. I told them they kidnapped me out of my 20s. Lured me into the van with free candy, and it took me 8 years to escape. Screw that place. Story 16. I work for a very large healthcare company. Think of the #1 in the US. I was in a department that did lots of IVs and gave coffee to the patients after their testing. The company refuses to buy Coban elastic tape. We have patients who are on blood thinners or have sweaty skin, in which case regular paper or plastic tape is not going to work. We've had several incidents where people on blood thinners bleed through the dressing we put on the site and drip onto the floor or their clothes. Yes, we can apply pressure to help, but 1, I have a super tight schedule and don't have time to do that, and 2, the place is radioactive. I don't want to spend any more time next to them than I absolutely have to. This was brought up to a manager around the time they were doing bonuses. The manager told us we could have Coban, or we could have bonuses, or raise. We don't use it often, definitely not for every patient. You can buy 120 rolls of the stuff for about $25. Regarding the coffee, it was made by a big coffee maker and put into a carafe. That carafe never got washed with soap or a sponge for the entire 2 years I was there. Just a quick rinse with water. They also let their service agreements expire for the very expensive camera when it was near the end of its life, but also refused to replace the camera, so lots of very expensive service calls were placed. They also allowed bullying by co-workers, and even after speaking with the manager, the offending parties were allowed to continue being abusive. Nothing has been done about it at all. For-profit healthcare is not only bad for the patients, but also bad for the employees. Story 17. When I worked at Krispy Kreme in high school, my coworker was steaming milk with the espresso machine to make herself hot chocolate, and we watched as a roach crawled out of the machine while her milk was steaming. And then she proceeded to actually drink the hot chocolate that she had made. I still get chills when I think about it. Also, yes, every single donut gets thrown out at the end of the night. Literally none are donated or anything, just dumped straight in the garbage. And the bags were always heavy too. I was 5'2" and 100 pounds, and sometimes the bags were so heavy that I couldn't lift them at all, or the bag would completely rip when I tried. Can't even count the number of times a customer asked what we do with the donuts at the end of the night and then threw a fit when told that we throw them away. Why they decided to lecture me, the 16-year-old minimum wage employee, about it and not the corporate, I'll never know. Story 18. When I worked in a call center at Sprint, our calls would get recorded, and we would receive an email that included a link to where we could review a transcript of our call. This transcript included the 3 pieces of personally identifiable information needed to access someone's account. Well, the email they sent to us used a get parameter ID that was simply a number to reference our transcript. If you changed the number, you would get someone else's transcript and the 3 pieces of personally identifiable information. I figured that's a pretty big security hole, but I at least have to access it from my personal office computer, so they'd see who did it, unless you went to the break room, where you could access it. Seeing how I was just out of college and I wanted to get a software engineering job, I brought this up to management, who proceeded to do nothing. I left a couple of months later for a software engineering job. Story 19. I don't know the specifics, the laws, and such. Still, the manager of the Amazon warehouse I was at wasn't allowed to tell workers they couldn't use the fans or AC in these above 100-degree environments. Still, somehow, he was allowed to shut off the fans and AC whenever he wanted. So this guy would spend the entire day, most days, following around anyone who would turn them on and personally turn them back off immediately. He was later fired, on paper, for telling people they couldn't use the fans and AC, but really, it was because the new district head just didn't like him. Amazon had absolutely no problems with the guy shutting fans off. People had been sending in complaints about it for years, but never had a word back about it. Story 20. I've worked for Bank of America and Wells Fargo, and both banks screw over customers constantly, but there is a difference in how and why they do it. Bank of America will screw you over because they are huge and disorganized and no one has a clue what's going on, so customers get screwed over when people don't know how to do their job, and no one knows how to fix it when things go wrong. Wells Fargo will screw you over, and they know exactly what they are doing and how they are going to do it. They will intentionally design a process to take too long, forcing the customer to pay additional fees. Story 21. College bookshops are a freaking racket. The used books that are sold for a high cost were likely bought back for a fraction. The only people who got the good price for book buyback were the first 5 to 10 people selling that book back. I saw a book be bought back for $200, and the next person through with that exact same book got offered $50. The add-ins for things like clickers were obscene. Books that were OKD for the school year would regularly get new versions that could just have 2 chapters flipped, but the new version meant that nobody could buy used, and the professor who wrote it gets a huge payout. The few good professors who gave away their materials were few and far between. The notion that digital books would be cheaper is laughable. Sure, they're charging $100 versus $200, but that's a $100 PDF. It's a racket, and I'm glad I don't need to mess with it anymore. Story 22. I work for a large health insurance company. They already have a plan in place that will drop millions of people with pre-existing conditions if the ACA is repealed. And I'm talking about small pre-existing conditions, allergies, asthma, etc. They'll then offer insurance for well over $2,000 per month. I currently work there. I used to be high up in the ranks, but my mom became disabled, and I took a demotion and pay cut to take care of her full-time. But they had this plan way back when I was still in my previous job. They were waiting for it to be repealed any day to execute. One thing they want to make sure is never covered, unless you pay the premium price, is insulin, EpiPens, and chemotherapy. Health insurance literally monetizes making humans suffer. They're no different than an arms manufacturer. Story 23. I used to work for a market research company. If you're old like me, you probably remember walking through a mall and someone with a clipboard approaching to ask if you'd be interested in offering your opinion on a new product. Those guys, they're still around but have adopted their business model since malls are pretty much ghost towns these days. They used to have food studies for big names like Kraft, Nabisco, Conagra, etc. They would bid on projects based on the number of respondents a company wanted, basically sample size, so if they sold a survey for 5,000 respondents, they might split that up as 100 people across 50 different malls, and they'd have a week to collect the responses. Inevitably, sometimes they wouldn't be able to get the number of people needed, and rather than admit this and prorate the cost accordingly, the company would just fabricate results out of thin air. They even built quite a complex system with the sole purpose of being able to quickly and easily create fictional response data that looked real enough. So a company might pay $45,000 for those 5,000 responses, and 60% of the data they received could be entirely fake. This company also did focus groups where a bunch of people would come in and they demo a product. It could be anything from a fragrance, to a food, to a laundry detergent. Sometimes they'd have trouble getting people. So half the people in the room would be employees, friends of employees, or employee family members. They were instructed to act like they didn't know each other to deceive the client. It was overall a crazy, toxic work environment. My first job out of college. And I'm glad I ended up getting fired for refusing to do some of the sketchy stuff they asked of us. Story 24. I was a bank teller before the 2008 to 2009 recession at Bank One, which is now JP Morgan Chase. On Saturdays, the bank closed early, 3 p.m. We'd call all the customers with overdrawn accounts and try to talk them into signing up for Chase credit cards, targeting people already in debt to get into more debt. We got paid a $5 to $20 commission for selling bank accounts products, and they chose to target vulnerable groups because they make so much money off of interest and late fees. Pretty sure Wells Fargo got reamed by Congress for similar predatory practices. The commission helped my paycheck though, but I felt awful and dirty at the end of my shifts. We also knew our mortgages were predatory. We just assumed no one reads the fine print before they sign the paperwork. I made $9 per hour at the time, yet I was pre-approved for a $300,000 mortgage back then, which was a mini mansion in the suburbs, probably like a $750,000 house now. No way I could pay that mortgage, especially once it ballooned after the introductory rate was over. As soon as your credit goes bad, or you have a bankruptcy on your record, you can't work for a bank anymore. Employees have to model financial responsibility. A coworker of mine, though, fell for the mortgage trick and bought a $450,000 house. Her husband got a loan to buy a Hummer. She got a BMW 5 Series. Guess what? They couldn't make their payments. First, she lost her job because her credit score plummeted. Then the house went into foreclosure, and their cars got repossessed. Yes, they were gullible, but Chase told them they could do it. They pretty much ruined her and her family's lives and millions of others. Bank One's CEO was Jamie Dimon. He's now the CEO of JP Morgan Chase after those banks merged. Do not trust him. He's not for the working class. He's for his shareholders. I know that's pretty much every CEO, but he's truly one of the scummiest of the billionaires. Story 25. Life insurance companies have an entire floor of 100 attorneys. Their entire job is to create marketing material and boilerplate content that has so many loopholes that no one gets paid what is promised. Life insurance is all smoke and mirrors. It's a grift. Also, temp agencies hire almost exclusively women. It is the modern way of exploiting women and paying them less than minimum wage when adjusted for no sick days, no holidays, no vacation days, and no health care. 25 per hour turns out to be 14 per hour on this pay scale. It saves the company money, but it harms all women. Also, the largest corporation in the United States is a temp agency. They often promise the woman that this is a temp to hire contract, but the employer never hires them. They also rarely ask on behalf of the employee because they would lose their revenue stream if they did. So this grift is by design. Story 26. They made up everything they did during the pandemic and blamed the workers. They replaced me when I got COVID as the outbreak was just starting, or at least people were becoming aware of it in the US, and then when I came back and they weren't expecting it, they tried to tell me my position was now dual, and I'd be working with some super toxic woman who constantly tried to get me in trouble for not wanting to be her friend. I sued them for firing me after I became ill. After 2 years, they decided to settle out of court. Before the meeting was adjourned, they made sure to let me know that I'm ineligible for rehire. Since it was settled, I'm not allowed to say anything but that. They knew they were in the wrong, and they were going to get railed if we went to court. Story 27. I sold Cutco knives. They are, at least when I sold them, a high-quality product, Everyone I sold them to that I know still uses the set they bought in 2009, but we were absolutely coached to do silly manipulative sales tactics. They wanted us to go out to our car or to another room and have a fake phone call with our boss, trying to get cheaper prices or bonus items to sweeten the deal. In truth, I had a document with a list of how low I could cut prices and which items I could add on for free. My tactic was to just be upfront. I was like, here's the sticker price. I can shave off $200 and throw in any of these items on top. I sold enough knives that they wanted to send me to sales conferences, but I was just doing it as a summer job before in college. Story 28. I used to work in IT for a mortgage company during peak COVID, and it's astronomically alarming that loan officers/processors/originators have so much detailed information about you and they're completely carefree about it. Imagine sending your most sensitive information, such as income, address, phone, email, company you work for, etc., to a loan processor who is working from home at Starbucks and just freely leaves their laptop there in the open for everyone to see. We had one LO call in and tell us he left his laptop at a coffee place 2 days prior, completely left it there unlocked. He couldn't comprehend the urgency until we had to notify every customer of his that their information may have been compromised. We had to get our insurance involved and also had to purchase credit monitoring for everyone. The scary part is, this happens more than you think. Just think about how dumb your average person is when it comes to technology, and then just think about what kind of data they work with. Story 29. Progressive is crooked. They don't care about their employees or their customers. They will add people to your policy without your consent. Even complete strangers who might have lived in your home a decade ago. Then they force you to prove you don't know them? I worked for them during COVID. I was already WFM, and when COVID hit, the first thing they did was relinquish all responsibilities when it came to technical issues, even if it was their equipment systems malfunctioning. Meaning, you don't get paid for days or even weeks on end when their stuff breaks. I went an entire month with a broken computer and got no pay. Someone on our team passed away during COVID, and not so much as a card was sent to her family. Also during COVID, we were required to watch the CEO's little vlogs from her mansion, talking about how she relates to everyone's suffering. They are a hateful, selfish company that cares nothing for their employees or customers. I've seen policies increase over acts of God and non-at-fault accidents. They have zero benefits for loyal customers. They don't give a crap about you. Will do everything in their power not to pay out on claims. In my first in-person interview, the interviewer made a joke about how one time, when he worked on claims, an entire family of Amish people was killed in a collision with a motorist that they insured. He thought it was funny. I could go on. Worked there for a little over 2 years, and the whole time I wanted to off myself. Story 30. I used to work for Singapore Airlines as a flight attendant for a really long time and retired a few years ago. The safety and security checks that are done prior to boarding are extremely detailed. No accessible parts of the aircraft are left unchecked. Even the smallest inconsistency is reported to the captain and the security personnel. Everyone who enters the aircraft must go through several layers of security checks and scrutiny, even the pilots. No PII is available/accessible except for the scope of duty at that point in time. Crew are constantly retrained and updated on safety, security, and service. Safety licensing is extremely strict. The crew will always try to ensure that the passengers disembark the aircraft happy. However, they could only rectify issues if they were informed about them. So if you feel that something is not right, highlight it to the crew. With the above-mentioned point above, be sensible too. There are limitations on what they can do. Don't ask for upgrades, as no upgrades are done in flight. We cannot turn the aircraft back to the airport because you left your phone behind. We eat the same food on board, and most of us enjoy the aircraft food on Singapore Airlines. We have very strict protocols for keeping the food safe. We are paid very well, unlike a lot of other airlines. The contract with the union states that we have to stay at the best hotels unless there are overriding factors such as safety and security issues. It is a really sought-after job with thousands of applicants constantly, and they are never short of applicants. The company takes very good care of the employees. Promotions and retention are transparent. Most crew members get involved in extracurricular activities in the company outside work. There's always something of interest that you can find. If you can't, then you are able to create an interest group. There's the golf circle, gourmet circle, language, photography, performing arts, martial arts, music society, dragon boat, etc. Harassment and SA are taken very seriously, and so is the crew's mental and physical health. There are so many more. After being there for more than 2 decades, I could say that they try to be the perfect employers as much as they can. In turn, the crew can provide genuine service to the passengers. Story 31. A bulk of insulated stainless steel drinkware tumblers, water bottles, Stanley cups, etc. all come from the same cluster of factories in China. They build them based on how much a retailer is willing to spend. Some have better insulation because the retailer paid for it, and so forth. They will sometimes respect specific proprietary features and appearances if the retailer is big enough and might take their business elsewhere. For example, Corkcicle, a big-name brand, has a specific shape for its water bottles that its factory won't make for anyone else. At their core, regardless of their shape, the way the insulation is done is pretty much the same. Some brands might use more effective insulation materials, which may be why their stuff costs more. You also don't see made in USA insulated stainless steel drinkware, because it's outrageously expensive to manufacture stainless anything inside the US. Factories in the US can't compete with ones in Asia, so they just don't. Story 32. I was a manager at a place called Tuesday Morning. I don't think it exists anymore. Not corporate, but got considered for it. Every time we had a new handbook, we'd have a meeting. No phones, no recording equipment. The handbook itself was as good and wholesome as you'd want. Hire anyone, hire everyone. In a wheelchair? Find something for them to do. Single mom? Students? We'll work with their schedule. Minorities? Everyone is welcome. And seniors? You love shopping here. Come work here. We'd read it, then corporate would tell us the real guidelines. No minority hires if we can avoid it. Many of our customers are racist old white people. So prevent the problem before it even happens. And especially not if they're Black or Latino, because they'll steal. No handicap hires. What if they need a wheelchair? That could block an aisle, and people can't shop around them. No single moms or students. It didn't matter that we gave 4-12 part-time hours a week. If they had a kid or school, they might not be on a 24-hour call and miss shifts. Seniors? They could die. They could fall over and hurt themselves. And then they sue the company. Don't risk it. Naturally, we all just hired whoever because it was such a crap job that we couldn't really turn anyone away. 90% of the time, corporate would push back. But they weren't just incompetent, they were powerless at a hiring level, so they just punished the manager who hired them. Ultimately, I looked at the place I worked for about 10 years as somewhere I survived and I helped my employees survive, not a job. I tried to take this story to the labor board. My ex tried to take it to the press, but that's why they do it like this. No cameras, no recording, just word of mouth, and they take the position of it's in our handbook, that employee is just jilted. Story 33. I worked for the most useless engineering company in history. God, it was annoying. They sold a client a finished product, told them they had successful operations elsewhere, scammed them into paying $100 million for this product and related infrastructure, then subcontracted a third party they could use as a scapegoat for the failures of the project while they rushed R&D, because not only did they have no working projects, they didn't even have a finished product. Every fault and failure was pinned on the third party. I was working 14-hour days just to try and keep things on track, which was freaking insane. I started burning out hard after 2 years of this, and started losing track of hygiene and cleanliness. I was living in a company house during this time, and my colleagues started complaining, and I got treated so badly by upper management because they didn't give a crap about how hard they were working me. Oh, they also sent out a letter saying they were no longer paying overtime because we were taking advantage of it, but I still had to keep this damn thing going, so I worked 14 hours with no overtime for a year. Anyway, I got poached by a competitor, and they offered me 6 figures, and I got the heck out of there. Then they started threatening legal action because I was developing a competing product, but my new company was like, no, screw these guys. We consulted heavily with lawyers before hiring you, and starting on this new project, those guys will get wrecked in court, and we are ready to go. Not a peep about legal crap. Since I told my boss about the threats, he must have handled it. Story 34. I used to work for one of those appliance and furniture leasing companies. I can tell you a few things. First, if they say new, make them bring it in the factory packaging. More than once, I saw stuff that had been in the showroom or in someone's house for a short period of time sent out as new. Second, don't buy mattresses from those kinds of places. I don't even want to talk about the crap I've seen happen on them. Third, way more times than I can count, I saw delinquent accounts suddenly caught up after an after-hours meeting with the GM. It's a gross, predatory industry. Don't support it. Story 35. Opticians are selling you unnecessary stuff at the eye doctor's office. Half of the upgrades they sell do nothing, or at most marginally. The anti-scratch coating stuff is actually a soft, liquefied latex material that is UV cured onto lenses, that actually causes coatings, that actually do things like anti-glare to craze crack and come off the lenses. Also, the impact-resistant lens material, sometimes sold as poly or polycarbonate, is a very soft lens material that actually scratches more easily than even just ordinary plastic CR39 lenses. These lenses can be scratched even just by cleaning your glasses with a t-shirt with fibers that are too rough. Blue light filtering lenses and coatings are all marketing and lying to you. There is no conclusive scientific evidence that reducing blue light exposure to your eyes reduces eye strain or helps you sleep. Some one-off studies suggest it could, but they also had small groups. There's also no evidence that blocking blue light for the long term does anything at all. They love to sell you on lenses that are thinner. The problem is that the same amount of lens power has to be packed into a smaller space, and while some materials like 1.60, 1.67, or 1.74, typically regarded as high-index lenses, do refract light more efficiently, they have serious drawbacks to that thinness, primarily in an effect called chromatic aberration. This effect creates rainbows on the edges of objects in the periphery of your vision, especially if you have high-powered lenses, which people who get high-index lenses almost exclusively do. I have extreme myopia, nearsightedness, and always get 1.74 lenses to keep the thickness of my lenses minimized. If I get lenses that are too wide, I get severe chromatic aberration, so I have to buy smaller frames to avoid this. Story 36. This is weird, but Best Buy has a rating system from 1 to 5 and a category for each customer. We use this to determine what kind of service they got. If you spent a lot and bought warranties, you would be a Barry 5. Barry is identified as a white male in his 40s with a wife named Jill. Jill enjoys aerobics and the latest tech to help her get healthy. There was also the empty nesters group, and some urban couple named Ray and his wife. Ray was identified as a black male who was looking to save money but loved technology. We often use these references over the headsets to let other employees know a Barry or Jill was here to drop big dollars. This was not just in one store, it was taught to us by corporate. Story 37. One of my old bosses wanted me to throw broken bags of fertilizer in the dumpster. He was friends with one of the higher-ups, so they never questioned him. I couldn't do it, so I would wrap them in plastic bags and put them on a pallet in the back of the warehouse. Then, when there were enough bags on that pallet, I'd wrap that pallet up and stick it somewhere, usually on the top rack in a corner, or on the floor under the rack in a corner. He was fired for theft, and I no longer work there, but yeah, the guy was a total sleazebag. He'd steal hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars a day during the busy season. He'd sell things at crazy prices if the customer were paying cash, just so he could steal the money. Other stores would check inventory, because they'd need products to give to customers sometimes, and could tell it was way too far off. But the higher-ups never touched him. I should have sued the company for some of the things it's done. I just wasn't privy to having workplace rights, so I didn't know. Truthfully, I always give people the benefit of the doubt, but not in this case. He's a terrible person, both inside and out. He doesn't need to be working again at all. He needs to be in prison, away from society. Actually, no one needs to be taking care of him. He's hurt too many people. he will use you and throw you under the bus if he gets the chance. Not because he has to. There would be absolutely zero reasons, simply because he can. He's an alcoholic with a gambling problem. I hope he's over his addictions, but still screw him. Story 38. I worked in a nursing home during the pandemic. It was a terrible time, as you can imagine. There were several deaths at the home, many of them due to COVID-19. The home has an open-door policy, which means that the residents can wander wherever they like. There were a few outbreaks of COVID in the home. Most residents were confined to their rooms during that time. You can imagine the psychological impact this was having on the residents and staff. Anyone who has ever worked in a nursing home will be aware of dementia patients who wander everywhere. Due to the open-door policy, some of these residents wandered wherever they liked, including being allowed to handle clean towels and bed linen, which were left in the open. I found one resident who was recovering from COVID in an unlocked laundry room. Despite the number of deaths and the danger to the residents and staff, the open-door policy remained in place. It was one of the most traumatic times in my life. Story 39. I worked for McDonald's and was shocked to find out their hygiene standards were actually high, and everybody followed them. Everyone really did their job, and the place was really clean and safe. Story 40. Stanford University has a database full of everyone who's ever attended the school or ever been treated at its hospitals. With the right access, you can look up anyone in their system and see their employment history, every place they've lived since graduating, and their connections within the larger Stanford community. The best part is there's a section that gives all the tax income information, with an estimate based on equations that say how much the person could realistically donate to the school without a negative effect. That way, when they call to fundraise, they know exactly how much to ask for. Story 41. As a former compliance director for telehealth mental health agencies, I would urge people to run from agencies like BetterHelp, Talkspace, Charlie Health, Guideline Healthcare, Ellie Health, etc. These are started by TechCore and other dollar-driven corporations and have little interest in protecting you, whether it's your mental health, confidentiality, or ethically driven care. These places are unacceptable and have low-quality treatment providers. You are best to find a local MH agency or individuals on Psychology Today. Story 42. It is very difficult for IHG to remove hotels from the portfolio if they are paying their dues and are mid-cycle. They can be very bad hotels, and there is nothing that can be done except for some rare life-threatening situations. Some hotels have consistently failed every quality evaluation for years, but will remain in the system because at the end of the day they make money for the company no matter how hard they harm the brand name. Marriott can do it a bit more easily for non-compliant hotels due to the structure of the quality department being through a third party. Story 43. At the company I worked for, everyone was assigned a Microsoft account. This was used for Outlook, emailing, and Teams for instant messaging and video calls. Naturally, plenty of privileged and sensitive information was exchanged in these ways. Everyone had the same password. It was the first name, last name, every employee and manager. But I didn't have the guts to test the theory on an executive's account. And this was a company that, among other droll and boring trainings, made sure we had our requisite cybersecurity/anti-phishing training. There was lots more silliness at that company, but that right there tells you all you need to know. Story 44. Many of the 2-3-year-old leased cars that look like they're in pristine condition really aren't. They get sent to major auctions that recondition them to make them look as new as possible in the quickest, cheapest way possible. Dings and chips get fixed, but not in a proper way. Prep is done hastily. Paint may flake off in 1-2 years. Parts like trim and handles are masked off instead of removed, much like a Mako job, etc. It just has to look pristine rolling across the auction block and sitting on the used dealer's lot. After that, it's the buyer's problem. It's also that while some frequently blame manufacturers for absolute crap finishes on slightly used cars, there are many on the road that it's caused by an auction's refinishing process. Story 45. I used to support restaurant POS systems. Every system, managed and supported by us, had the same admin username and password for the computers, the admin software back of house, and the credit card processing software. Also, their employee database file on the terminals was an Excel spreadsheet. It had their names, login #s, addresses, date of birth, phone numbers, social security numbers, etc., and you could mention the aforementioned admin username password to access them. They also outsource support to a country that hates the US. As I trained them, they reminded me, quite often, how they don't like the US. Story 46. I worked at Wells Fargo during the fake account stuff. I was 23, trying to conduct professional meetings with VPs whose careers tripled my age, trying to tell them what was going on so they could address it. This was several years before stuff hit the fan in public. Luckily, it took me just 2 meetings to understand that literally even the CEO was in on it. A couple of months later, I get written up for insubordination because I refused to open a fake account for an elderly couple who obviously didn't know about it. As soon as they left, my manager asked me to forge their signature and transfer their own money into it. I had my securities license Series 7 and 66, and they still asked me to do it, meaning I could have sued them for enough to retire several times over with the full backing of the SEC, where I probably never would have had to step into a courtroom. I left and moved on. A lot of banks still operate this way due to an overabundance of mitigated mental composure, failing to realize a better revenue structure than the bottom feeder fee income. Fully grown adults operating at the executive level, leeching off $10.30 monthly fees from accounts, where crap stacked on top of crap sadly affords several-figure compensation regularly. Story 47. I worked for Apple in Apple Care Worldwide based out of the US, essentially as a Tier 3 or 4 tech support, depending on what the issue was. Most of my customers were businesses, celebrities, politicians, etc., or escalations for T2/3, who needed support from Apple's engineering team. At least 5% of the tickets I handled per week were people who would never have access to their Apple ID ever again, functionally bricking their devices as well. Of those, 90% were due to an Apple issue. Once it happened to a prime minister of a European nation and once to a company with over 1,000 devices, all using a domain-controlled Apple-deployed Apple ID management server. Also, the prevalent data breaches that were reported and ignored were horrifying. I'll never own an Apple product. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.